Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for coming out this evening, and for those of you on the West Coast this afternoon for our Women's History Month non-traditional software engineering panel. I do just want to go over a code of conduct. We do have some folks outside of the Codesmith community, and Codesmith, since this is their Zoom room, they've asked me to go through some of these code of conduct standards for this meeting today, for this event, that this is just like a zero harassment space. So just be respectful of everybody in the room while you're joining in today. Aside from everything you see here on the screen, like avoiding discrimination, bullying, and the like, just also be sure to use the raise hand feature if you have questions once we get over to our Q&A portion of the event today. But aside from that, let me introduce our panelists. We have a great lineup for you all today. First off on this screen, you can see Elsa. Elsa, if you want to go wave. I don't think we have enough folks in here yet to spotlight. Oh, let me see. Let me spotlight you all right now. Perfect. So we have Elsa, and Elsa is a software engineer at Target. And before that, she had a career in hospice care, supporting patients at the end of life and their families. She lives in Minnesota with her partner under the watchful eye of their two cats. And next up on our panel, we have Frankie, who's a software engineer at Paravita, a technology consulting firm that serves a variety of industries. And before her transition into tech, she worked as a nurse practitioner, but her passion for problem solving and creativity led her to start self-learning to code. And after falling in love with software development, she attended Codesmith and graduated in August of 2023. And we have Faye as well, who is a full stack software engineer at JP Morgan Chase and Company in asset management, where she builds and maintains an investment platform for institutional clients. She had a background in performing arts, which shaped her adaptability and creativity in problem solving. After also completing a coding bootcamp, she successfully navigated the shift into software engineering and now thrives at the intersection of technology and finance. And so just to let you all know a little bit about the structure that we have for today, we will be going over in the first half a few questions that we've prepared in advance of the panel, and then we'll be opening it up for our audience to share some questions as well. And we can just do a round robin for those different questions that we have, and whatever might come up, you guys can feel free to piggyback off of each other as well. But just to start off, I know some has been mentioned a little bit in your bios, but how have your previous experiences from your different industries or roles or your past education, if applicable, have shaped your approach to software engineering? And Elsa, if you want, you can feel free to start us
Okay,
out.
didn't know if you had a preferred order. Um, yeah, I mean, as Ashley mentioned, I came from a background that was in healthcare, but used like the softest skills imaginable. Really like heavy on the communication stuff. And so uh, I think what I've been able to take from my career in the past has really been, I think, my ability to connect with people, my ability to, I've been in a lot of roles, even outside of healthcare, but prior to software engineering, where it's been really important to be able to define a problem. And I'm sure as all of you know by now, like unless you can very clearly define a problem, you won't be able to build software that addresses it. So I think I mentioned the relationships, that problem solving. Yeah, I'll stop there. I'll pass it, but lots.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on off of what Elsa said. I think specificity when we're communicating a problem, that's really important for any role, especially software development, software engineering. With my background, it's a little different. So I was in the performing arts before. I was a trained actor, but with that, we did a lot of improv, so a lot of quick thinking. So I think with improv, that comes a lot of in real time problem solving. So I was able to just grab those skill sets that I learned with that, as well as the communication aspect of it and interpersonal communication, and apply that within my current role.
I love those answers. It's super cool to like see how you can creatively twist your experiences and they actually do apply to software engineering. I think sometimes we don't realize like a lot of people come from non-traditional backgrounds and they think, oh, it's not technical, but like a lot of the skills actually do apply in a different way. So just to piggyback off what Elsa said, I also have a healthcare background. I did some palliative care as well, but prior to that, I worked in the hospital, in the emergency room, and being able to think very quickly on your feet, think critically, and break down tasks, I think was a really important skill that definitely transitioned to software engineering because you'll have like a really big problem that may seem really difficult to solve when you break it down to smaller pieces. That's actually something that you probably don't really, a lot of industries are doing that kind of thing. In terms of the soft skills, working with other people, that is a life skill that is going to work in any industry. So I think I was really, really able to develop my soft skills, work with other teams, work with other people, conflicting priorities. Those are all things that I definitely use in my day-to-day now. So don't be afraid to like creatively twist some of the things that you've worked on if you do have a non-traditional background.
Yeah, great to hear how adaptability, problem solving, and creativity, all of those, like those soft skills can really bleed into software engineering. And it's great to see how each of your previous experiences have really been a strength in your software engineering roles now. My next question for you all is, what challenges, if any, did you face as someone with a non-traditional background entering the technical industry or tech industry, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm sure we'll get to this later in terms of just confidence and imposter syndrome and all that. But I think there's, I kind of came to find out there's like a whole kind of vocabulary that people with the computer science background like are using casually with each other, and even like the ways that I kind of came into my role talking about like, just kind of agile stuff like has kind of completely changed. But I think there were far fewer obstacles than I expected having a non-traditional background. And I don't know if there's a better question to share this in later, so I'll say it now in case I don't get a chance. But I wanted to mention that there's a lead on my team who is like a little genius to me, like has a computer science background, very smart, and he just talked about how when you're getting a computer science degree, he's like, you're learning how computers work, but they're not software engineering is a completely different discipline. It's about solving business problems. He said, and they don't teach you that when you are getting a computer science degree. You can have whatever advanced computer science degree you want. That whole other skill set is still there. And so I think like that kind of, to pull back to the last question as well, like so many of us have so many skills that can solve business problems, and then we're just bringing along that technical piece that we've built up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the same for me, definitely. We'll touch more about imposter syndrome later, like Elsa said, but I think the skill set, it's not as if it was a surprise for me, but you're constantly going to be learning throughout your career as a software developer. And I think that was a mindset that you needed to shift into once you're learning and once you're like getting into software engineering in general. But definitely just having the confidence to know when you don't know something and acknowledge it, but try to learn it as you go. I think that that is something that it was kind of a shock to me, but it was something that I had to overcome initially.
Yeah, imposter syndrome was the first thing that came to mind for me. That was like something I really struggled with when I first started the boot camp, and then when I was job hunting. I feel like it's gotten a lot better this is my first job in engineering, and seeing that I can do the thing that other people are doing that have computer science degrees, I'm like, wow, that's so weird. I never thought I'd be able to. So that's gotten better. I think it's hard coming from a non-traditional background. You feel like people are going to judge you. Being part of an underrepresented group in tech. Also, you feel like people don't think you belong there. So just again, trying to have the internal confidence to get through that. Technically, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it's like to have a computer science degree, so I don't know how much that would actually help on the day-to-day job. It probably would help some of the theory and concepts, but I do feel like I've been able to pick up things and learn things, and I think the boot camp teaches you how to teach yourself new things, which is always going to be required because you're never going to know anything. Like you're never going to go know everything wherever you work. So being able to like learn those things, I feel like I got a good foundation in the boot camp, but maybe a computer science degree would help. I don't know at this point. Maybe not.
Yeah, that's really fair. I mean, none of us really in this room would know personally how it might change things. But I think, especially thinking about how each of you have just kind of thought about how imposter syndrome kind of shapes that challenge in entering. Are there any like specific moments that you'd like to speak about in terms of grappling with self-doubt or imposter syndrome that you might want to elaborate on before we dive into our next set of questions?
Yeah. And stop me if you think there'll be a different time later to talk about like coping with the imposter. Okay. Um, yeah. So, a couple things like, so I started in this job, my first software engineering job in just this last October, so October 2024. And yeah, like I, um, if I wouldn't have had like imposter syndrome, just like walking in, starting that job, I would have gotten it from like just the job hunt process. Like it, if you have it already in the job hunt process, but then like it, you're grappling it with with each rejection, with each like technical interview that like goes wrong. But something I kind of found my way to like early on in this job is leaning into like, okay, what do I know is absolutely true, and you can never tell me it isn't. Like number one, I left a career, like the only career really I had known, um, and took a big risk and did something and learned something new. And it was, and I like took on all the scariness that comes with diving into something new, putting myself out there to like try to find a job. And I did get a job. So like that accomplishment in itself, I like hold on to as like my core truth. Like I'm not an imposter to that. Um, and the second thing I kind of came to is like, um, if there's like anytime there's like a creeping thought of like, oh, I tricked them, like, just kind of leaning into like, okay, good. Like you don't even have to look far, like in the news or in the world to see like there is a lot of people in a lot of positions and places they should not be, but it's least of all like those of us who are underrepresented in tech. There's like so many groups represented on this call. That this does not that is not applied to. Like if you think you tricked them, good, you tricked them. Now like make it work. It's kind of how I've taken it.
I love that so much. I follow something or I followed something similar to that, where it's like during my interview process or the massive amounts of interviews that I went on, I just walked in and I was like, okay, I'm an underrepresented group in this industry. I clearly did not go to school for this. It's not even imposter syndrome. I feel like I am an imposter and I'm trying to trick them into like hiring me. So in a way, I kind of made it a game. So it's like if they said no, it's like, okay, tried. Let's on to the next. So I think like not necessarily making light of it, but just like trying to, it's a numbers game. So like trying to make it into a game where I can present myself and like see what works, see what doesn't work. Maybe if I approach it in a different way, like using like acting as a background, how can I present myself in a situation where I'm definitely going to be nervous? Um, like how can if it's soft skills, how can I present myself in a way where they see me in a different lighting? So I think acknowledging imposter syndrome, acknowledging that there are a lot of people who aren't meant to be in roles that they are. But what I can bring to the table is the amount of effort and the amount of wanting to be there so much. That's something that would be one of my values. So.
I love what you guys said about like there are a lot of people in roles that shouldn't be there, but they are, and they probably didn't have imposter syndrome. And that honestly motivates me because I'm like, wait, if they don't have imposter syndrome, why the hell do I? So anyway, I love that. And that actually really does motivate me when I'm feeling the imposter monster, which is what Codesmith always called it. Okay, I have two like thoughts about imposter syndrome. The first is I think when you have it, you can feel very alone and you feel like you're the only one that has it. And I think reframing that and knowing that like honestly, like most people that I've talked to, whether they're in tech or not, or like anywhere, they've experienced it at some point. So just know that you're not alone. And I think talking to other people about it makes you just feel a lot better about it. Like you're like, oh, okay, everyone's feeling it. It's not just me. It really is a syndrome. Like it's not, you are not supposed to be there. It's just something that you're feeling. It's all in your head, really. So if you can just trick your mind into not feeling that, it will go away because you actually should be there and you're totally like ready to be in the room. Like fake it till you make it. That's what I kept telling myself. The other thing is, I think coming from a non-traditional background specifically, we are like very inclined to feel it because you just feel like there's like a zoom on you, like people are like, oh, waiting for you to fail because you don't have that computer science degree. But actually, I've had a very different response from people, especially at work and people that are higher up on the ladder than me. Like they love that I have a non-traditional background. So use it as a superpower, not something to your detriment. Like talk about it. I know during interviews, you know, you want to focus more on technical stuff, but when you do get a job, talk about it in a way that's like, this makes me different and diversity is what makes innovation. So this is actually going to help your company and this is going to help me do a really great job. Like don't shy away from it. The fact that you're able to have a completely different career, learn another thing. Now you just basically made two careers. Like that is so impressive. So see it in that way because other people actually do, and I've had really good responses from it. So yeah, be confident because you literally did two really hard things. So that's what I have to say about imposter syndrome.
I just want to say one quick thing before, like, you just reminded me, somebody, on my team who had been there for like 20 years, like she had found, on my first day, she found out like I came from this different background. She was like, oh my gosh, I could never do that. I could never like imagine like trying to leave and like get another career. Like that is so, I don't know how you did that. Like people are looking at it like, wow.
Yeah, that's
Really, that's
awesome.
the only response I've had, honestly. Like no one has said, oh, so you can't do it, obviously. No, like everything has always been very, very positive. So just know that going into it, try to just switch it and be like, this is how I'm going to help you because I have this different background and someone else doesn't have that, you know?
Yeah, I feel like that's so inspiring to hear those stories because I know there's some of us in this call that have really like the other end of the stick, like where folks, maybe not that we work with or just in those community spaces, might not necessarily be as receptive to folks in non-traditional backgrounds, especially like people of marginalized genders that are breaking into tech as well. But I know, Frankie, you just mentioned a way for you to get over imposter syndrome was just kind of putting a name to the face, speaking to people about that, and kind of building your community there. So I was wondering for all of you about how do you find community in your own work environment? And are there like any different practices that you've found effective in fostering inclusivity and building community in your teams or your workplace in general?
Yeah, a couple things. So just thinking like, on the team level, I've, and this has helped with imposter syndrome as well, but I've gotten together with others on the team, who, target assigns levels, as many companies do. And like, so those engineers who are at my level, and we have like a little book club. So we meet, I think now we're meeting like every other week. And we're reading like books that we have access to through like Target provides like O'Reilly, all of their resources. So right now we're looking at like Headfirst Java because a lot of us are trying to learn Java for the first time. And we're like just going through that together, chapter by chapter, like, bringing like questions that we have, or, an exercise that was like difficult. Sometimes, like, because we've now like built this little group and community, say, there was half my team's in the US, half my team's in India. But there was a lead on the US side who talked to a couple of us about just Spring architecture and stuff like that. And that was just an in-person office day. And then there were folks on the Target India side who didn't get that same. So it was like we were able to like share that knowledge, and like just hearing that people have the same types of questions and things like that. The other thing is just seeking out like any types of affinity groups that exist within the workplace. It's probably easier at a bigger organization, but like at Target, as you probably know, Target's in the middle of its own inclusivity mire right now. But like I'm a member of this like Pride Plus business council at Target, and there's so many others that like, even us in that organization, we support those other groups. And so it's just about finding like people who are wanting to build that community inclusivity with you, and linking up.
I love the book club, the book club solution. The way that I went about just like creating a community within JP Morgan. So the first week that I joined, well, first of all, I'll say I lucked out with the team that I have. I know that based on experiences from other people that I've talked to, that's not usually the case, but I just feel so lucky to be within the team that I have. But the first week that I joined, I was talking to a bunch of people about what people do outside of work, and somebody brought up the party planning committee that we had. Immediately, I signed up for it. I was like, I want to be a part of that. So within like all the birthday celebrations, everything, like I know it seems silly to be the party planning committee, but the amount of connection that you can make with other people who are within your close vicinity, so like in the tri-state area, that it was amazing. So I was able to build those connections with people and like in a deeper understanding, and have conversations outside of work about work as well. But yeah, I think as a general rule of thumb, just try to reach out and try to be a part of something bigger than yourself. I feel like as humans, we all try to do that regardless. So doing that within work, and just getting your name out there, that's the core of creating just relationships in general. So yeah, that's my advice, I'd say.
Yeah, totally agree with what you guys said. So I was also really lucky with my job because everyone's just really nice and really supportive. We have a hybrid model, which I know some people are like really just want to work fully remote, which I love working remote, but going in honestly has been the best thing for relationship building. Just going like once or twice a week. When everyone's there, I feel like we just not only professionally we get to like help each other with technical things, but just getting to know other people in person is completely different than via Zoom. So I would not shy away from looking at hybrid roles. I absolutely love going into the office. What else is said? Affinity groups, they are awesome. If you work for a company that's big enough that has them, or even if it's a small one, you can start one. Like I'm part of like it's called Esprit de Femme. It's basically a women's group. We have meetups like once a month. I'm also part of like our LA engagement group, which is basically a party planning committee. So we'll plan like escape rooms or, I'm planning a pickleball social, just like getting to know people on a different level. I think you would do that at any job. It's not really any different in the tech world, except I think it's tougher when you're working fully remote and you have to, if you want to actually see people outside of work, you really have to make the effort. I went to like a concert with my manager a couple weeks ago. So you can just basically any other job. It's really no different. And then before you get a job, I went to some like LA tech meetups. There's tons of events that you can network with people. So LinkedIn, use your Codesmith alumni groups. There's so many ways. You just kind of have to put the effort in.
Yeah, that's great to hear, like the affinity groups or employee resource groups, and then also you all coming together and like taking initiative, like Elsa with the book club, and then Faye with your party planning committee. I think those are just really fun ways to come together and mingle with folks in your community because your work is kind of your own community, and then kind of bring your own self, your personal self there too. So it's really nice to see how, like Frankie, you just mentioned, you have to put yourself out there. So making sure that we all remember that once we're in that space, that is really on us to take that initiative and be able to build that community as well. I'm just going to ask one last question before I pass it off to the folks in the room to pose any questions that they might have. And I wanted to ask each of you, in your opinion, what are the most exciting trends or technologies in software engineering right now? In your opinion, yeah.
I will I'll take this as an opportunity to like practice what I preach about authenticity, because the truth is, like, when I was reviewing some of the questions I might be asked, like I had to Google like what are some trends, like, and the reason for that is I'm kind of like fighting for my life to learn like some of the technologies we actually use, like just in the Java, not that like not cutting edge. But I'm like, to be very transparent, like, 5 months, however long I've been here, into my role, like I am still trying to like learn. I haven't like turned yet my neck out to everything else that's coming along the way. I was maybe going to mention like vector databases and AI, because that is something maybe someone else will. But yeah, that's just where I am right now.
I'll say I'm pretty much on the same boat. So I, personally speaking, like when I first joined JP Morgan, I was just trying to hang on in there for dear life. And so eventually, I also don't have a degree at all, period. So that also came into imposter syndrome. But so joining JP Morgan, they offered me the possibility to go back to school, and they would pay for that. So I'm currently working and in school. So like I said, like amount of time to just like focus on one thing at a time is a little difficult. But I will say that I am one of the things that are kind of exciting, both at work, like school, everywhere, like is the AI, like PR buddy, Codium, Copilot, things like that that are used by developers in order to code. That is kind of exciting. It can seem like you're training your own replacement at times, but I think that just learning how to incorporate that into your everyday lives as you code, um, that is what's going to propel you into to development. It's such a great tool. Um, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. Just AI for development.
Yeah, I don't really have an answer either, because the stuff I'm working on, I feel like is not very, not that it's not innovative, it's just kind of like old school stuff that is probably not exciting for most people. I work a lot with cloud architecture right now. So I'm just gonna steal your answer, Faye. I'm sorry. I also really like the new technologies that are coming out to help developers code more efficiently. I think it's super cool, and I know people are worried about it, but I will say that there's still a lot that AI is super unhelpful at, and I fully believe you really need a person for a lot of the things. I just worked on something that AI was just sending me down a completely wrong direction, and you really needed like an engineer to figure it out. So I don't think our jobs are going away anytime soon, hopefully. But the things that help you code, or just like debugging things when you're like, oh, there's an extra parenthesis somewhere and VS Code's not alarming me on it and I can't find it. And you're just like, I don't feel like spending 8 hours looking for it. Things like that, that makes life a lot easier. To be an engineer in this day and age is really great to start a tech job right now.
Thank you. I feel like that's a nice way to stay hopeful in the age of AI, especially as all of us in this room are like in a boot camp, graduated from a boot camp, or self-taught in some shape or form, like just to stay optimistic about ourselves on the job hunt or in our jobs at this time. But before I take up too much time with my questions, I wanted to open up the floor for our folks here to take some time and ask any questions that they would like. I see Arnold here. You have your hand raised. You can go ahead.
Hi, all. Thank you for doing this. My question is for Elsa, but also to anybody else who feels like they want to answer it. Um, I think for myself in particular, and probably for some of my cohort mates here, I think one of our concerns, especially considering that we have never really been a part of like corporate America, is to like apply for a job and then sort of have them sort of change up their stances on things like Target. And so I was curious, Elsa, if you could talk about how their stuff with the DEI initiatives and their current stance, like does that sort of like affect your team? Does it affect the day to day? I imagine morale's probably not that great, but like what if any changes have you seen as a result of that in your like current day to day workflow, if any?
Yeah, it is so crazy because like the company I applied to work at for and got a job at is like in policy wise is so different than like where I am now, even just a few months later. But no, the day to day aside from morale, which is significant, has stayed the same. And what I have heard more of is like individuals either on my team or on the wider team or like again affinity groups like uh, people emphasizing their commitment to the values that they thought like that Target was committed to before. And so while like it's still super concerning their position internally and then out into the world, but inside I'm not hearing people be like, yes, thank God. Like if people are really like, okay, no, like this is who we are. Like we're and even like supervisors, leaders reaching out to be like, I'm I'm gonna operate the way I always have. Like so I've appreciated those moments for people to like actually speak up about where they are because otherwise you don't get that a lot of the time. Oh, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of like trying to see what the temperature would be like after a situation like that within a company, especially in a software developer role. And if there's like concerns for like advancement within that company or if like some of the people are like, you know what, I'm gonna look for something else kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think probably maybe people at higher levels might think like I kind of feel like I like I was so like, oh, I couldn't believe when I finally got this job where I'm like, I can't like let's, I'll leave it there, but it's yeah, internally feels similar, the same.
I will say it might, maybe it will change the jobs that you apply for depending on the company's stance on it. Like my company, we had a meeting recently and they're like, no, we are doubling down on they call it JEDI where I work, which is just, they moved the acronym around and they added the J for justice. So they're like, we are doubling down on our JEDI initiatives. Like we are not doing what a lot of the other companies might be doing. Like they are really, really making sure that everyone knows that it's super important. So, you know, maybe that's part of the culture that when you're looking for jobs, be aware of it. Culture is really, really important when you finally start working. I know it's really hard in the beginning because I remember I applied to 500 jobs and I was like, I don't care where I work. I just want a job. I don't care what I'm doing. Like, please just give me a job. But the culture of where you work is super important. So keep that in mind when you do accept something.
Awesome. Faye, did you want to chime in before we go to the next question?
I feel like JP Morgan has I mean, I don't know if you guys have heard a lot about Jamie Dimon, but he's very vocal about certain issues. But with DEI programs, I think we haven't really had that much internally, any impact internally. Especially I think, especially within asset management, there's a hiring freeze regardless, but within internal mobility, that hasn't really been impacted internally from what I've experienced. But I'll echo what Frankie said. So like if you're applying now, that will definitely, or that could just be something that you're paying closer attention to. If that's, like it's definitely something to consider when you're applying to a company. But I feel like especially us coming into these positions when we're already like we feel we're at a disadvantage, like we're just applying everywhere. Whoever says yes, we're going. So I'll echo what Frankie said.
Thanks all so much. Next up, I see Jocelyn. You can go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question for everyone on the panel. It's related to like team processes and workflows. So I was curious to know what your team's approach to technical debt is. How do you balance future work with like improvements and refactoring?
Yeah. So I'll say as like, kind of the entry level engineer role at Target, like I'm more in a position to like you tell me what I'm gonna do and I'll do it. Like but so like my story started out kind of small, like when I was starting out doing like just some React stories on the front end. Kind of got to come across like just chaos like in our test files or just various like redundant pieces of code that could have been made into reusable components. And even like with my own knowledge, I was able to kind of bring up like, hey, I spotted these things. Like, can I? And people were like happy to, yeah, sure, like great. Like, so it's really just been things like I've been able to catch along the way, but I haven't. It's all really story work for features and then like any tech that I catch. But I'm assuming, though I can't see like a complete bird's eye view yet, like that maybe some of that's being tackled elsewhere, or I don't know.
So for tech debt and other features that we're building currently for JP Morgan, so we go through agile ceremonies and during stand-up and PBR, like things like that, we plan out sprint planning, we plan out what is going to happen throughout the next sprint. So we have terms of like two, maybe three or four sprints planned already. So we're kind of like focusing on everything all at once, and we have enough. If you're part of a bigger corporation or something like that, where you have enough engineers that can focus on different things, you're most likely going to be working with all of these things in the same sprint, so simultaneously. And speaking from experience, like I think from if you're in a larger corporation, you're going to have to deal with a lot of compliance, things like that. So other teams are going to have to tell you what to do. So if you're part of a startup, that's going to be very different. Whereas in like you're going to need to know the ins and outs of the application that you're working in and all the systems and maybe cybersecurity, things like that. Where in larger corporations, you have the advantage of not having to deal with that. But then again, you're not really learning all of that aspect of it. So currently that's my experience. Like we work with everything on different sprints. As they come in, we just pick it up.
My experience is a little bit different because I work in consulting, so we get put on different projects with different clients. The main project I've been on the whole time has been basically just me. I'm the only engineer, and then I have my manager who's there for help. So we have stand-ups, but it's more of like, okay, something blocking me. So I kind of make my own process of what I think is important to get done. And sometimes that's tackling something that I think is tech debt that will be a big problem, and sometimes it's working on a new feature. There's a really good book that I think you guys should read. I'll put it in the chat. It's called The Effective Engineer. It's great for like new engineers starting out. And this is one of the things they talk about. Like, how do you decide, am I going to go down this road of trying to fix something that maybe is already working, but it's not so great? Or am I going to work on new things? And it honestly depends where you work. Is it a startup where you need to move fast? Or is it somewhere where you have a lot of time that you can optimize something? I think it really depends how much effort is it going to be to fix something that maybe doesn't need to be fixed versus what is the output. Is it going to be low effort, really high outcome? Okay, maybe that's worth it. Is it going to be really high effort and actually not really matter? Probably not worth it. Something that I really had to get over was like trying to perfect code that I saw and I was like, this is not great. Like, this is so much blah, blah, blah. Like, it's a mess. It's spaghetti. Okay, it works though. You have a chance of breaking it if you start touching it and think you're going to make it better. So highly recommend reading that book because it shifted my perspective on being a perfectionist when it comes to coding.
Awesome. I have a PDF of that. I'll drop in the chat so you all can be able to read The Effective Engineer. I just want to amplify a question that's come in on the chat from Zen. And just for clarification, like Zen did not attend Codesmith, so I think it might be helpful, like especially hearing from Faye for this question. But she says, I was honestly a little surprised to hear from Elsa that saying that landing a job was easier than expected. Can you all tell us what your job hunting experience was like in terms of what your resume looked like, finding job listings that were a good fit, and the interview process, especially coming from a non-traditional route?
I am so sorry. I'm sorry if it came across like that. What I meant to say, or what I was trying to say, was that I was surprised how few like obstacles I had once I was in my job. Getting a job was very hard, I'm sorry to say, but it is doable. Um, I forgot the second part of that question because I was so distraught with with the message I put out there. But if you could,
Yeah, she also asked what the experience was like in terms of like resume, finding job listings, your interview process. If there's anything that stands out to you from your own job application process, aside, from getting the job itself, that might be helpful for Zen or anybody else in the room.
yeah, I'll just say that my my job search, when I came out of Codesmith, I had a pretty limited runway, like financially, of how long I could commit to um, job hunting full time. And so there's kind of like how the job search looked before that, and then how the job search looks once I had to like throw my hands up and just get any job to like keep living. Um, but throughout that time, um, like I was able to get like a fair amount of interviews, but like the real defining feature was that I interviewed with Target 3 times. Now this is the old Target. I really like that was my dream. Like I really wanted to work for Target. Um, and so I like, I had interviewed once like in this was in like May after I had graduated from Codesmith in January. And like had gotten to the final round, didn't get it, like, but had a great connection with that hiring manager. So that when a role opened up later in September, I like messaged her and she was like, oh, I already brought you up actually for this role. I thought it was great. Like I interviewed for that, didn't get that role. But that long story short, that led into yet a third opportunity, and that's where I got it. So like for me, it was really characterized by like knocking a lot on the same door because I kind of felt like with the limited time that I have, now that I have to work full time, I could probably work on like refining my strategy enough with Target that like, and just like know enough, like just keep talking to people there until I could make something happen. So that's kind of the route that I went.
I would echo that exact same thing, knocking on the same door more than once. So I, when I left, so I went to Flatiron boot camp. So when I left Flatiron, I was just applying everywhere, sending my resume everywhere, applying online. I applied to JP Morgan twice before. And I don't know if you're familiar, like once you send your resume, they also ask you to like fill out exactly what your resume says. So the third time, what I did instead of, so I don't have a bachelor's degree. On the third time, since I do have some college, I checked that I did have a bachelor's degree. Immediately they called me to go in and interview. Same resume, same everything. So once I actually got there, and this was my first in-person interview. All the other interviews that I had done before were completely virtual. And this, I actually had the experience to go in and whiteboard, which was terrifying. I actually started bleeding at one point, and that's a story for another time, but it can be very stressful. But I think, especially like coming in with an acting background, if you walk into a room, basically with a card in your sleeve, up your sleeve, even if you don't have a card up your sleeve, just it makes you so much more of an interesting person in a way. It makes people pay more attention to you. So I think I used that a lot during my interview process, like being an actor, going to auditions, like things like that, receiving a no. That was second nature to me. So being able to hold that and do an interview, a technical interview, that was really helpful. I will say, so if you ever go into an interview and they obviously, if they're a good interviewer, they're going to ask you if you have any questions. There are two questions that I highly recommend you asking. So one is, what does a successful candidate in this position look like in terms of personality traits? So basically, they're going to give you a blueprint of everything that you're expected. And if you do get into that role, just follow it to a T, especially in the first 90 days. But the second one, and this is if you only have time for one question, just ask this question instead. If there's anything about my resume or this interview process that will stop from my candidacy from moving forward. And then once you ask that question, stop talking. Just wait, just politely stare at them if you can. Because this is obviously going to bring up the fact that you are not a computer science major and you don't have that degree. So they might try to be polite about it, but if you just let them talk, they're going to kind of like take into account what you just did during your interview. So I highly recommend that question.
I love those questions. That's a really good idea. I know we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and be fast. The job interview, the job hunt process was extremely hard for me. I think it was maybe like 10 or 11 months, honestly, probably like 400 applications. It's definitely a numbers game. Just get as many out as you can. And then when you get an interview, my strategy was to start interview prep as soon as I had one. And also interview prep while you're still applying, but put more emphasis on it once you have interviews ready. I think Codesmith tells you all of the things you need to know about interview prep. So just one thing that is not really mentioned as much, don't be so hard on yourself if you don't get a job. Like there's going to be a lot of rejection. I was really, really hard on myself and I got really emotionally invested whenever I had an interview and I was like, this is the company, like this is my dream. And maybe it was. And then when it didn't work out, I would be like in a super dark depression because I felt like that was my worth being taken from me. So don't like really try not to get so emotionally invested. When I got this job, I had like switched out of that mentality, and I was like, I actually don't care. Reject me if you want. And I feel like that actually made me more confident because I wasn't like so like, please, please, you know what I mean? So it ended up really working out. So just remember it's a numbers game and it has nothing to do with your self-worth. Get as many applications out as you can. Use the Codesmith resources, have them look over your resume, do tech interview prep. Don't be afraid to go in person and whiteboard. I also had to go in person and whiteboard, and I think that was helpful because again, they see your personality. They see like, okay, is this someone I would want to work with closely? So it is really scary, but a lot of places are doing that again. So don't back out of it if you feel like you don't want to go in person. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about, but I want to try and get to all the other questions. So I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. Next up, I have Kiki here on my screen.
Hey, I just wanted to ask about this is sort of building off of something that Faye said, but coming from a non-computer science or engineering background, I was just curious, like when all of you presented yourself, if you sort of downplayed your past experience and tried to mostly present computer science experience that you did have, or if you think it did help to show things that you had done in the past. And I understand like it does help to have those past experiences in the job. I'm more so asking like when you're applying for the jobs, are you leading um with the computer science stuff and sort of minimizing the rest?
Yeah, I'll say, I like really tried to follow Codesmith advice as far as like, I minimized, reduced, a long-ish career down to like one line and then highlighted the technical parts. And that was like painful, but I think good. And in interviews, like always led with technical stuff. But sometimes in my narrative, like, and it helped to kind of have a couple different versions. And like when I could feel that it was appropriate or I had like researched the like hiring manager enough to know that might be meaningful to them, would like kind of just emphasize like there was this that there was this background, and it was like kind of a risk in doing that. But the person who ultimately hired me was like quite like just charmed by that. Like really, I think she had like some like near-death experience like with her daughter in a car accident in the last like few years, and it like she like really appreciated that there were like things outside of just like computer that I like thought were meaningful. So I kind of feel it out, but like, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it depends a lot on the interviewer. The person that you're talking to has gone through a lot of things as well in their life. So kind of feel it out, I would say. For me personally, I downplayed a lot of it. I found that a lot of the interviews that I went on, um, they really didn't care. Especially, I think there's like for like acting, they just looked at me and they were like, nah. So I think for me, I had to really amplify my technical skills and go from there, I'd say.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I definitely tried to downplay my past experiences. And again, I also put it like my whole career into one line, which was definitely hard. But I would agree with what Codesmith recommends, which is really highlight your technical first. And then depending on the situation, it may come up, your past experiences. And again, you kind of just have to feel it out based on the company, the industry, and the interviewer. I have a healthcare background, so anytime I was interviewing for something like health tech company, I would play up more in terms of like, oh, I would be able to, help the product by having this like as a user, I would understand the user better. It depends where you come from. Like if maybe you have a finance background and you're applying for JP Morgan, like maybe you should play it up a little bit more because that could help you stand out. So I would say maybe A/B test your resume. My resume that did have my old experience on it actually did a lot better, but it's going to be different for everyone. So take that with a grain of salt.
Thank you.
Awesome. We only have time for one more question, and then I've gathered some and I'll try to like piece them together so we can ask and let you guys go on time. But Ting, you can go ahead and ask your last question.
Thank you. I want to ask in the first 19 days, as the question say, so company culture is very important. So how does your company support you in the first 90 days? Yeah, because I know some engineering position, they will use some, maybe the language is not yours, you were using before. That is very scary, and how you adapt to that in the first 3 months.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in the first 90 days, that's when your employment is still conditional, right? So they're testing it out. They're gambling with you basically. So they kind of want to see and they kind of want to know if you're going to work out. So it's a lot of pressure on you. It's a lot of pressure, and you got to navigate that in a graceful way, maybe that's a good way of putting it. But I think that as long as, like, since you're still learning everything about the company and you're learning the code, you're maybe even learning the language that you're using. I think if you just really amplify those soft skills and show that you're actively trying to do something, being proactive about it, asking questions, never be afraid to ask questions. They're going to be stupid questions. You can preface that. Like, hey, I have a stupid question. Can you please explain to me what this is? I think that what really helped me was showing that I wanted to be there and I wanted to make a difference and I want to be part of that team. So I would highly recommend just doing that. Not only in the first 90 days, could definitely continue doing that, but especially in the first 90 days.
I don't know if my company had that contingency. I don't know if that's a universal thing or not, but I will say it goes back to the culture thing. Like when you're starting, they obviously want to make sure you're a good fit, but you also want to make sure that they're a good fit for you. And that's why it comes back to like finding a place that has a good culture. Like my company, it's been established for a while, so they have a really strong mentorship program. Like I meet with my mentor every 2 weeks. Any issues with my projects or anything, you can talk with them. So that's another thing that I would maybe look out for. Making sure that they're supporting you. But yeah, totally agree with Faye. Like be super proactive, show that you're working, really hard technically, but also on the soft skills and getting to know people and wanting to, being a team player that people want to work with. Again, and honestly, that's not for everyone. I really like the structure, but I know some people really prefer that startup lifestyle that's like, there's 5 people and you're kind of doing your own thing. So find out what works for you.
Awesome. I know we are at time. If you're able to, everybody in the audience, I'd love to take a quick screenshot just to commemorate everyone being here today. And also, panelists, are you comfortable with sharing LinkedIn contact information? There were some specific questions that came in towards the end, and I'd love for those folks to be able to get the answer to their questions. Okay, awesome. Okay, ready, everybody? On cheese. 1, 2, 3, cheese. Thank you all so much. And big round of applause to our panelists, Elsa, Faye, and Frankie, for coming out and giving back to the community, really. And I really appreciate you all taking this time out of your day. Also want to thank Codesmith for giving me this Zoom room so I wouldn't get kicked out after 40 minutes. A special thanks to Hannah and Cassandra for helping organize as well. But I will let you all go now. Panelists, you're welcome to go. I'll just drop your contact information in the channel here so you all can stay connected.
Thank you guys. Thanks, Ashley.